"Sign it," Michael snarled, and he slammed his fist down on the marble table so hard the divorce papers jumped. He shoved them into his wife's chest, grabbed her wrist, and forced the pen between her fingers. "You're worthless, Claire. You always were. You're nothing without me, and everybody in the city knows it." He expected her to cry. He expected her to crawl. Instead, she pulled her hand free, signed her name in one steady stroke, and looked at him with a calm that turned his blood to ice. Because the man who just called his wife worthless had no idea a billionaire's private jet was already coming for her. Before we go any further, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel and stay with me all the way to the end of this story because you will not believe how it turns out. And do me a favor while you watch. Leave a comment and tell me what city you are watching from right now so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Now let me tell you about Claire. For 8 years, Michael Bennett believed he had built his entire empire with his own 2 hands, and he made sure everyone in Chicago believed it too. He walked into rooms like he owned the air in them. He shook hands with investors and let them call him a visionary, and he never once corrected them, never once said the word. We never once mentioned the quiet woman sitting at home who had carried him through the darkest years of his life. In his own mind, Michael had done it alone, and a man who convinces himself of a lie long enough will eventually treat the truth like an enemy. The morning he decided to end his marriage, Michael did not wake up sad. That was the part that would haunt him later when everything came apart. He woke up light. He woke up relieved. He stood in front of the mirror in that penthouse apartment overlooking the river, straightened his tie, and rehearsed the words he was going to say to his wife as if he were rehearsing a pitch to a boardroom. "You don't fit into my world anymore, Claire." He practiced under his breath. "We both know it. You're not the same person." He smiled at his reflection. He actually smiled. Downstairs in a law office he had chosen precisely because it was expensive and cold and impersonal. 2 attorneys were already waiting with the documents. Michael had planned this the way he planned an acquisition. Clean, efficient, final. He had even brought his phone so he could check email while it happened, because in his mind, this was a transaction and Claire was a liability he was finally removing from the balance sheet. Claire Whitmore arrived exactly on time the way she always did. She wore a plain gray coat that Michael had once called embarrassing in front of his colleagues. She carried a small handbag. She did not bring a lawyer, and that alone told Michael everything he wanted to believe. He looked at her walking in with nothing, no representation, no fight in her, and he thought, there she is, exactly the woman I always knew she was. Small, quiet, not built for this world. He was so wrong that later he would lie awake at night physically sick from how wrong he had been. "Claire, sit," Michael said, and he did not stand up when she entered. That was the first cruelty of the day, and it was deliberate. "Thank you for being punctual. Let's not drag this out." Claire sat. She folded her hands. She looked at him with an expression he could not read, and that bothered him more than tears would have. "I've had the papers prepared." Michael continued, sliding a folder toward her. "It's a fair settlement. More than fair, honestly. My attorneys think I'm being generous." "Generous?" Claire repeated softly. It was not a question. It was almost a memory. "You'll have enough to be comfortable," Michael said, and here his voice took on that tone she had heard 1,000 times across 1,000 dinners, the tone of a man explaining reality to someone he assumed could not understand it. "Look, I'm not going to insult you by pretending. Somewhere along the way, we became 2 different people. I built something enormous, Claire. I'm meeting with people now who move markets, and you—" He paused, choosing the knife carefully. "You were content to stay small. That's not a criticism. It's just the truth. You never really wanted to be part of what I was doing." One of the attorneys shifted uncomfortably. Even a stranger in the room could feel the temperature of what was happening. Claire did not flinch. She simply asked, "Is that what you tell people, Michael, that I was never part of it?" "I tell people you're a good person," Michael said, and he actually believed this counted as kindness. "But let's be honest with each other for once. You were never in the business. You supported me, and I appreciate that I do. But there's a difference between the person who makes the coffee and the person who closes the deal." There it was, the person who makes the coffee. Claire had once stayed awake for 3 consecutive nights going through a contract Michael's own lawyers had missed a fatal clause in a clause that would have handed a competitor the rights to his entire technology platform. She had found it at 4 in the morning, circled it in red, and woken him up gently so he could fix it before the signing. He had kissed her forehead and called her a genius that night. Now 7 years later, he called her the person who makes the coffee. She let it land. She did not correct him. And this is the part that reveals who Claire truly was, because a smaller person would have exploded. A wounded person would have listed every sacrifice, but Claire had already made a decision somewhere deep inside herself days before this meeting, and the decision was this. She was not going to spend 1 more minute of her life begging a man to see what he had chosen to be blind to. "May I have the pen?" she asked. Michael blinked. "You don't want to read it first. You don't want your own attorney to review the terms. I trust that you've been generous," Claire said, and there was something in the way she said generous that should have warned him, something almost gentle, almost pitying. "You said so yourself." She picked up the pen. She signed her name in clean, unhurried strokes. Claire Whitmore. And then she set the pen down, closed the folder, and slid it back across the table toward him. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Michael had ever heard. He had prepared for a battle and been handed a surrender, and instead of feeling victorious, he felt strangely deeply unsettled, like a man who has swung a hammer expecting resistance and hit nothing but air. He found himself talking to fill the quiet. "I want you to know I don't regret the years we had," he said, which was a lie, built on top of a lie. "You helped me through some rough patches. I'll always remember that." "I know you will," Claire said, standing. "Eventually." "What does that mean?" She picked up her small handbag. She looked at him one last time, and for a single second, something flickered across her face. Not anger, not grief, but a kind of sadness so old and so quiet that Michael would remember it for the rest of his life without ever fully understanding it. "Goodbye, Michael," she said. "I hope she's worth it." And then she walked out. Now here is what Michael did not know, and it is the thing that turns this entire story on its head, so stay with me. Michael assumed Claire walked out of that office with nothing. He assumed she had nowhere to go, no power, no name, no future beyond the settlement he had so graciously offered. He built his whole understanding of her on a foundation of one simple belief that Claire Whitmore was an ordinary woman who had gotten lucky when she married him. Every single piece of that belief was false, but we will get to that. First, you need to understand what kind of man Michael became after she left, because a man's true character does not show up in how he treats people who can help him. It shows up in how he treats people he thinks can do nothing for him. And Michael, freed from the woman he considered dead weight, showed the world exactly who he was. Within a week of the divorce, Michael moved Lauren Hayes into the penthouse. Lauren was 31, an executive he had promoted twice in 18 months, a woman who laughed at every joke and touched his arm when he talked about his success, and never not once asked him a difficult question. Where Claire had challenged him, Lauren agreed with him. Where Claire had warned him, Lauren applauded him. And Michael, who mistook agreement for loyalty and applause for love, thought he had finally found the right kind of woman. "She actually understands me," he told his business partner David Chen over drinks that week. Claire never did. Claire was always so cautious, always finding problems. "Lauren gets it. Lauren pushes me forward." David, who had known both women, swirled his glass and said carefully, "Claire found problems because Claire was usually right, Michael." Michael laughed it off. "Claire was afraid of everything. That's not vision, David, that's fear. You can't build an empire on fear." David did not laugh with him. David had watched Michael's company for 6 years, and David had noticed something that Michael refused to see, which was that ever since Claire had quietly stopped attending the late-night strategy sessions, ever since she had slowly withdrawn from the parts of the business, Michael pretended she was never part of the company, had started making mistakes. Small ones at first, a vendor contract that ran over budget, a market projection that missed, a hire that went bad. Nothing fatal on its own. But David had been in enough failing companies to recognize the smell of one, and lately when he walked into Michael's offices, he smelled it. "Just promise me something," David said. "Before you close the Redmond deal, run the numbers past someone who will tell you no, someone who isn't afraid to disagree with you." "I have a whole team of analysts," Michael said. "You have a whole team of people you pay." David said quietly. "That's not the same thing." Michael did not hear the warning. Michael never heard warnings anymore. That was the disease that had been growing in him for years, invisible and patient, the belief that he was smarter than everyone in every room, and the divorce had only made it worse, because now there was no one at home to say the word Michael had come to hate above all others. No. Meanwhile, Claire did not fall apart. This is important because Michael in his imagination pictured her collapsing, pictured her crying to friends, pictured her regretting. He needed her to be smaller than him even after she was gone, because that was the only way his story made sense. She did none of it. Claire drove out of the city that same afternoon. She did not go to a friend's couch or a cheap apartment. She drove north out past the suburbs, along a private road that most people in Chicago did not even know existed, up to a gated estate that sat on a bluff above the lake. She rolled down her window at the gate, and the guard, an older man who had known her since she was a girl, straightened up and smiled with a warmth Michael had never once shown her. "Miss Sterling," he said. "Welcome home. He's been expecting you." Miss Sterling. Claire Whitmore was a name she had chosen for herself years ago when she was 23, and desperate to be loved for who she was, and not for what she came from. Because Claire had been born into the Sterling family, one of the oldest and quietest private investment dynasties in America, a family whose name did not appear on skyscrapers because they preferred to own the land under them. The Sterlings did not seek attention. They did not need it. They controlled capital that shaped industries, and they did it from behind curtains through funds and foundations and holdings that most of the public would never trace back to a single family sitting on a bluff above Lake Michigan. And Claire was the youngest daughter of that family. She had grown up watching wealthy men treat people as instruments. She had watched her own suitors in her early 20s fall over themselves to impress her father while barely looking at her. She had watched men calculate her value in dollars before they ever asked about her heart. And so, at 23, exhausted and heartbroken by a world that saw her name before it saw her face, Claire Sterling made a decision that her family found reckless and that would define the rest of her life. She walked away from the name. She took her grandmother's maiden name, Whitmore. She got a job under it. She built a life under it. And she promised herself that the next man who loved her would love her for nothing but herself. Then she met a struggling young entrepreneur named Michael Bennett, a man with big dreams and empty pockets, a man who could not have cared less about a dynasty because he did not know one was standing in front of him. And Claire, for the first time in her life, felt seen. Not her money, not her name, her. So she gave him everything, her mind, her nights, her instincts, her heart. She helped him build his company from a rented room into a rising star, and she did it invisibly on purpose because she wanted it to be his. She fed him the introductions that saved him, and she let him believe they were luck. She caught the mistakes that would have ended him, and she let him believe he caught them. She stayed in the shadows so that the man she loved could stand in the light, and he thanked her by calling her worthless. The old man who ran the estate, the one who was expecting Claire, was her uncle Nathaniel Sterling. If you have heard the name Sterling in connection with anything, you have heard it in connection with Nathaniel, because he was the one member of the family who occasionally allowed his name to surface, the billionaire investor whose approval could turn a small company into a global empire overnight. Nathaniel had raised Claire like his own daughter after her parents passed, and Nathaniel had never forgiven himself for the thing he had done years ago, which was to let her walk away and disappear into a life he could not protect her inside of. Claire found him in the study, and the moment she saw him, she felt 8 years of composure begin to tremble. "Uncle Nathaniel," she said. "Claire," he said, and he crossed the room and held her the way a father holds a child who has finally come home from a long and terrible journey. "You came back. I signed the papers today." "I know." His voice was gentle, but there was steel under it. "I've known everything for a long time, Claire. I just respected your wish to live your own life, but I could not respect it forever. Not after what I've learned." Claire pulled back and looked at him. "What do you mean, what you've learned?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to his desk, and he opened a leather folder, and he slid it across to her, the way only hours earlier Michael had slid divorce papers across a table. But what was inside this folder would not end a marriage. It would end a lie. I had people look into your husband's company, Nathaniel said, not because I wanted to interfere, because I wanted to know that the man you gave your life to was worthy of it. And Claire—" He paused, and something in his face broke. "What I found made me sick." Claire looked down at the folder. She did not open it yet. "Tell me." "He erased you," Nathaniel said simply, "from all of it. Do you understand what I'm saying? The strategies you built, the introductions you made, the disasters you prevented. He didn't just fail to credit you, Claire. He systematically removed your name from documents. He rewrote the history of his own company so that you were never in it. There are investor decks that describe his early years, the years you carried him through, and you do not appear in a single one of them. He didn't forget you. He deleted you." Claire's hands, which had been so steady when she signed the divorce papers, began to shake. "I always knew he didn't credit me," she whispered. "I told myself I didn't do it for credit. I told myself I did it because I loved him." "There's more," Nathaniel said, and now his voice dropped, because what came next was the thing that changed everything. "The company he thinks he built alone, the company he threw you away to protect. Claire, it's collapsing. Right now, tonight, he's about to close a deal called Redmond, a leverage play so reckless that my analysts flagged it in an afternoon. If it goes through, and it will because there's no one left to stop him, it will destroy him within the year. Every warning sign you would have caught he is walking straight into, because he got rid of the one person who ever told him no." Claire sat down slowly. 8 years of silence, 8 years of being invisible, 8 years of being told she was small and cautious and afraid, and here was the truth laid bare on a billionaire's desk. She had not been holding Michael back. She had been holding him up. And the moment she let go, he had begun to fall, and he did not even know it yet. "He's going to lose everything," she said quietly. "Yes," Nathaniel said. "And here's where you have to make a choice, Claire, because I can move faster than his collapse. I can be in that room. The Redmond people, the investors he's chasing, they would sell their souls for a meeting with a Sterling. I can walk into his world tomorrow. I can take everything he has and leave him with nothing, and I can do it in your name, so that the last thing he ever understands is that the woman he called worthless was the one who ended him." Nathaniel leaned forward. "Say the word. Say it, and I will burn his empire to the ground for what he did to you." And this right here is the moment the whole story turns on, so listen closely, because most people at that table would have said yes. Most people, after 8 years of being erased, after being called worthless across a marble table, after signing away a marriage to a man who kissed a younger woman, before the ink was even dry, most people would have looked at a billionaire offering them total revenge and said, "Do it. Burn it all." Claire did not say yes. She sat in that study for a long time, and Nathaniel waited because he loved her enough to let her arrive at her own answer. And finally, Claire looked up, and there were tears in her eyes. But her voice was steady, the steadiest it had been all day. "No," she said. Nathaniel blinked. "No?" "I don't want you to destroy him," Claire said. "I don't want revenge, Uncle Nathaniel. I've watched what revenge does to people our whole lives. I watched it eat men alive from the inside. That's not what I want." "Then what do you want?" Nathaniel asked, genuinely stunned, because in all his decades of power, he had rarely met anyone who turned down the chance to crush an enemy. Claire wiped her eyes, and she said the thing that would define everything that came after the thing that separated her from Michael more clearly than any amount of money ever could. "I want the truth," she said. "For 8 years, I lived inside a lie, and I let him tell it because I thought love meant staying invisible. I don't want to make him small the way he made me small. I don't want to become the thing that hurt me. I just want the world to finally see what actually happened. I want the truth to stand up on its own, Uncle Nathaniel. And if the truth destroys him, then it was always going to. But I won't be the one holding the match." Nathaniel stared at her for a long moment. And then slowly this hardened old titan of finance, a man who had ended careers over breakfast, began to smile, and his eyes grew wet, and he shook his head in something close to wonder. "Your mother would be proud of you," he said quietly. "God, Claire. You're the most powerful person I've ever met, and you don't even know it. Real power isn't destroying a man who wronged you. Real power is having every weapon in the world in your hand and choosing to set them down." "So you'll help me?" Claire asked. "My way." "I will help you your way," Nathaniel said. "But understand something. Your way is going to be harder. Because if you don't destroy him, if you let the truth do the work instead, then you have to go back into that world. You have to stand in the same rooms as him. You have to let people see you, Claire, the real you, the sterling you, and you've been hiding from that your whole life. Are you ready for that?" Claire was quiet. Because the honest answer was no. She was not ready. She had spent 20 years hiding from her own name, from the weight of it, from the way people's eyes changed when they learned who she was. She had built an entire identity, an entire marriage, an entire self around not being a sterling. And now, to reveal the truth of what Michael had done, she would have to reveal the truth of who she was. There was no separating them anymore. "I need a few days," she said finally. "Take them," Nathaniel said. "But Claire, the Redmond deal closes at the Investor Summit on Friday. Michael will be there. He'll be at the top of the world, thinking he's about to meet the mysterious Nathaniel Sterling who could make his empire global. He has no idea the Sterling he should have been afraid of has been sleeping in his bed for 8 years. Nathaniel's smile turned into something colder, something that reminded Claire he had not gotten where he was by being soft. "The plane will be ready Friday morning. If you want to be there, be there. If you want to stay here and let it play out from a distance, that's your choice too. But I'll tell you this. That man is about to walk into the most important room of his life, chasing a name he doesn't understand. And the name is going to walk in on your arm." Claire went to bed that night in a room she had not slept in since she was a girl, and she did not sleep. She lay awake and thought about Michael. And the strange thing was that she did not hate him. She had loved him too completely to hate him. She thought about the young man. He had been the one who used to bring her cheap flowers because they were all he could afford, the one who used to whisper, "We did it when a deal closed," back when he still remembered there was a we. She grieved that man. She grieved the marriage. And somewhere in the dark, she made peace with the fact that the man she had married had died a long time ago, and she had simply been too loyal to hold a funeral. Meanwhile, across the city, Michael was celebrating. He and Lauren stood on the penthouse balcony with champagne, and Michael was telling her about Friday, about the Investor Summit, about how this was the week everything changed. "They're saying Nathaniel Sterling himself might be there," Michael said, his eyes shining. "Do you understand what that means, Lauren? One meeting with Sterling and we go global. One handshake and I'm not a Chicago success story anymore. I'm a national one, a world one." "You deserve it," Lauren said, touching his arm. "You built all of this yourself. Nobody handed it to you." And Michael, drunk on champagne and delusion, said the words that would ring in his own ears like a curse for the rest of his life. "That's exactly right. Nobody handed me anything. I did this alone. Every bit of it. Alone." Behind him, his phone buzzed. It was David Chen, calling for the 4th time that day, calling to beg him one last time to run the Redmond numbers past someone who would tell him the truth. Michael looked at the screen, saw David's name, and silenced it. He did not want the truth tonight. He wanted the champagne. He wanted the balcony. He wanted the story he had told himself for 8 years, the beautiful lie that he was a self-made man who owed nothing to anyone. He silenced the call, turned back to Lauren, and raised his glass. "To me," he said. And somewhere north of the city, on a bluff above the lake, the woman who had actually built the thing he was toasting closed her eyes at last and made her decision. She would go to the summit. She would walk into that room, not for revenge, not to destroy him, but because the truth deserved to stand up in the light after 8 years in the dark, and she was done being the one who kept it hidden. The days between that night and Friday moved slowly for Claire and quickly for Michael, and that difference told you everything about the two of them. Claire spent her days in careful conversation with Nathaniel and with a small team of people who had quietly and without her knowledge been assembling something for weeks. Because here is a detail Michael never could have imagined. When Nathaniel said he had people look into the company, he did not mean a quick glance. He meant a forensic reconstruction. He meant that a team of the most discreet analysts in America had spent a month rebuilding from thousands of recovered emails and archived documents and financial records the true history of Michael Bennett's rise. And in that true history, on nearly every important page, was a woman Michael had tried to erase. "He was thorough," one of the analysts told Claire, sliding a thick binder across the table. "He deleted your name from the internal versions, but he forgot something that people always forget. Email lives forever. Every strategy you sent him, every warning, every fix, every introduction you brokered, it's all still there in his own outbox, in his own words thanking you. Miss Sterling, he wrote you a message in year 3 that says, and I quote, 'I would be nothing without you. You are the brain of this company.' He wrote that himself. And then he spent 5 years pretending you never existed." Claire read that email 3 times. "I would be nothing without you. You are the brain of this company." She remembered the night he sent it. She remembered believing it meant he would always know. "I'm not going to use these to humiliate him," she said quietly, closing the binder. "I want that understood. This isn't a weapon." "Then what is it?" the analyst asked, puzzled. "It's a record," Claire said. "It's proof that I was real. That's all I've ever wanted. For 8 years I started to doubt my own memory because he told the story so many times so convincingly that even I began to wonder if I'd imagined my part in it. This binder isn't for him. It's for me. It's proof that I didn't imagine my own life." That was the moment even Nathaniel's hardened analysts understood they were working for someone unlike anyone they had ever met. Michael, meanwhile, spent his week doing the opposite of reflection. He rehearsed. He rehearsed his pitch to Sterling. He rehearsed his humble self-made origin story, the one where he clawed his way up from nothing, the one with no Claire in it. He bought a new suit. He had Lauren on his arm at every dinner showing her off, and more than once he made a comment about his ex-wife, always the same theme, always the same cruelty dressed up as honesty. "My first marriage taught me a lot," he said at one dinner to a table of investors. "Mostly it taught me that you can't build greatness while carrying dead weight. Some people are anchors. You have to be willing to cut the rope." The investors laughed politely, but David Chen, sitting at the end of the table, did not laugh. David had gone quiet all week ever since Michael silenced his 4th call, and David had started making his own quiet calls to people he trusted, asking the question that would soon detonate under Michael's feet. The question was simple. Has anyone actually verified the numbers behind the Redmond deal? And the answers David was getting back were not good. 2 nights before the summit, David finally reached Michael in person, cornering him after a meeting. "Michael, I need 10 minutes, David said. "It's about Redmond. The numbers don't hold. I've had 2 independent people look at it, and they both said the same thing. The debt structure is a trap. If the market moves even slightly against you, the whole thing implodes and takes the company with it. You cannot close this deal on Friday. Please, I'm begging you as your friend, not your partner. Walk away from Redmond." And Michael, who 6 years earlier would have listened, who 6 years earlier had a wife who taught him to listen, looked at David Chen with a flash of something ugly in his eyes. "You sound just like her," Michael said. "Like who?" "Like Claire," Michael said, and he said her name like it was a disease. "Always the problem. Always the risk. Always the reason not to do the big thing. You know what I finally learned, David? People like that don't protect you. They shrink you. And I am done being shrunk. Redmond closes Friday. If you don't have the stomach for it, maybe you don't have the stomach for where this company is going." David looked at his friend for a long moment, and then he said something Michael would replay in his mind 1,000 times in the year to come. "You know what your problem is, Michael? You think everyone who ever told you no was your enemy, but some of us were the only reason you survived." David straightened his jacket. "I'll be at the summit Friday. I'm going to watch you do this. And when it goes the way I know it's going to go, I want you to remember that I stood right here and I begged you not to." Then David walked away. And Michael, alone in the hallway, felt for one brief second something he had not felt in years. Doubt, a cold thread of it sliding down his spine. For 1 second he thought about Claire, about how she used to look at a deal and see the thing everyone else missed, about how many times her caution had saved him back when he still let her near the numbers. And then he crushed the feeling, the way he crushed everything that threatened the story of the self-made man. He straightened his tie. He told himself David was scared and Claire was gone, and Friday was going to be the greatest day of his life. He was right about one thing. Friday was going to change his life. He was just wrong about how. Friday morning came gray and cold over the city, and it came bright and clear over the bluff above the lake. In the penthouse, Michael dressed like a man preparing for a coronation. He checked himself in the mirror the same way he had on the morning he ended his marriage, and he did not notice that the man looking back at him had a hardness around the eyes that had not been there when he was young and poor and loved. "Today's the day," he said to his reflection. North of the city, Claire stood on a private airfield beside a jet with the Sterling name nowhere on it because the Sterlings never put their name on anything, and Nathaniel took her hand. "Last chance to change your mind," he said gently. "We can turn around. You've been through enough. No one would blame you for staying home." Claire looked at the jet. She looked at the sky. She thought about the young woman who had walked away from her own name 20 years ago because she was so tired of being seen as a fortune instead of a person. And she thought about the woman she had been for the last 8 years, invisible in her own marriage, erased from her own work, told across a marble table that she was worthless. "I've spent my whole life disappearing," Claire said. "First to be loved for who I am, and then to let a man I loved take all the credit. I'm done disappearing, Uncle Nathaniel, not because I want to be seen, because I'm tired of being unseen. There's a difference." Nathaniel squeezed her hand. "Yes," he said softly. "There is." They boarded the plane, and as the jet lifted off and turned south toward the city, toward the summit, toward the room where Michael Bennett was about to have the single worst and most important awakening of his entire life, Claire looked out the window at the clouds and felt for the first time in 8 years something loosen in her chest. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the beginning of it. The feeling of a person who has finally stopped running from herself. At the summit, the ballroom filled with the most powerful people in Chicago finance. Michael arrived early, Lauren on his arm, and he worked the room like a king among subjects, shaking hands, dropping the name Redmond, letting everyone know the deal was closing today, letting everyone believe he was about to ascend. He kept glancing at the entrance, waiting, hoping, praying that the rumors were true, and that Nathaniel Sterling would actually appear, because one word from Sterling and Michael's whole world would go global. He wanted Sterling so badly. He had chased that name for years. He had no idea that the name had been sleeping beside him, cooking in his kitchen, catching his mistakes, loving him for free for 8 long years, and that he had thrown it across a marble table and called it worthless. Across the room, David Chen stood near the wall, watching the doors, waiting for something he could feel coming, but could not name. And then a hush moved through the crowd like a wave starting at the entrance and rolling backward, conversation dying, table by table, heads turning, and Michael felt his heart leap, because this had to be it. This had to be Sterling arriving. This had to be the moment his life changed forever. He was right. His life was about to change forever. He turned toward the entrance with the biggest smile of his career already forming on his face, ready to meet the billionaire who could make him a god. And through the doors walked Nathaniel Sterling, and on his arm in a gown, the color of quiet power, her chin lifted, her eyes finding Michael's across the silent room, walked the woman Michael had called worthless, Claire. The silence in that ballroom lasted only a heartbeat, but for Michael Bennett it stretched into eternity. His smile, the one he had prepared for Nathaniel Sterling, the one meant to charm a billionaire into making him a god, froze halfway across his face and then slowly, horribly began to crumble. Because the woman on Nathaniel Sterling's arm was not a stranger. The woman on the most powerful man in America's arm was Claire, his Claire. The Claire he had thrown across a marble table 3 weeks ago and called worthless. For a moment, his brain simply refused to process it. He actually blinked the way a man blinks when he thinks he is seeing something that cannot possibly be there. He looked at Claire, then at Nathaniel, then back at Claire, and some desperate part of his mind tried to construct an explanation that let him keep his world intact. She works for him now, he thought wildly. She's a guest. It's a coincidence. She snuck in. Anything. Any story except the true one, because the true one was already reaching up from the floor to swallow him whole. Nathaniel Sterling walked into the room like the room belonged to him, because in every way that mattered it did. And every powerful person in that ballroom, the same people Michael had spent the morning trying to impress, turned their backs on Michael entirely and oriented toward Sterling like flowers turning toward the sun. Michael did the only thing his ego knew how to do. He stepped forward, hand already extended, mouth already opening to introduce himself, to seize the moment he had chased for years. "Mr. Sterling," he said, and his voice came out higher than he intended. "Michael Bennett, it's an honor I've been hoping to." Nathaniel Sterling walked straight past him. He did not slow down. He did not glance over. He did not so much as acknowledge that Michael Bennett occupied space in the physical world. He walked past Michael's outstretched hand as if it were empty air, and the whole room saw it, and the whole room understood it, because in that world, a snub from Sterling was louder than any speech. Michael's hand hung in the air for one agonizing second before he pulled it back. Nathaniel walked to the center of the room, and Claire walked beside him, and then Nathaniel turned, scanned the crowd of Chicago's most powerful, and let his eyes settle on the young man he had just humiliated. "There he is," Nathaniel said, and his voice carried without effort the voice of a man who had never once needed to raise it. The self-made man. A ripple of uncertain laughter moved through the crowd, the laughter of people who do not yet know whether they are watching a joke or an execution. "I've heard so much about you, Mr. Bennett." Nathaniel continued, walking slowly toward him now. "The visionary. The genius who built an empire alone. I've read the interviews. I've seen the profiles. All that talk about how nobody handed you anything." He stopped a few feet away. "I found it fascinating, because I happen to know quite a lot about the actual history of your company. More, I suspect, than you'd like anyone in this room to know." Michael's throat had gone dry. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." "No?" Nathaniel said softly. "I don't imagine you are. That's rather the whole problem, isn't it?" And then he turned, and he extended his hand to the woman beside him, and he said the words that ended Michael's entire understanding of his own life. "May I introduce my niece, Claire Sterling, the youngest daughter of the Sterling family, and until about 3 weeks ago, your wife." The room did not gasp. It was too stunned to gasp. It simply went utterly, completely silent, a silence so total that Michael could hear his own pulse hammering in his ears. Sterling. Her name was Sterling. The woman he had married. The woman who had reviewed his contracts and caught his mistakes and brokered his introductions. The woman he had told an entire city was dead weight and anchor the person who makes the coffee. That woman was a Sterling. She was the name he had been chasing for years. She had been in his bed, in his kitchen, in his life, holding his empire together with her bare hands, and she was the single most powerful bloodline in American finance, and he had thrown her away and called her worthless. His legs actually weakened. He reached out and gripped the back of a chair. "Claire," his voice cracked on her name. Is that true?" Claire looked at him. And here was the thing that undid him more than anything Nathaniel had said. There was no triumph in her face. There was no cruelty. She looked at him the way you look at someone you once loved and lost, with a sadness so deep and so genuine that it made the whole thing worse, because he could not even comfort himself by telling a story where she was the villain. "Yes, Michael," she said quietly. "It's true." "Why?" He started and stopped and started again, his composure shattering in front of 200 of the most important people he would ever meet. "Why didn't you ever tell me 8 years? 8 years, Claire. Why would you hide something like that from your own husband?" And Claire gave him the answer that would haunt him for the rest of his days. "Because I wanted someone to love me without knowing my last name," she said. "I wanted one person on this earth to look at me and see me. Just me, not the money, not the family, not what I could do for them." Her voice did not waver, but her eyes shone. "For a little while, Michael, I thought that person was you. When you were poor and hungry, and you used to whisper we did it. I thought I'd found the one man who loved me for nothing but myself." She paused. "I was wrong. You didn't love me without my name. You just didn't know I had one. And the moment you decided I couldn't do anything more for you, you threw me across a table like garbage. So no, I never told you, because you were never safe enough to tell." Somewhere in the crowd, a woman put her hand over her mouth. Michael stood there gripping the chair, and for the first time in 8 years, he had absolutely nothing to say. Every weapon in his arsenal, the charm, the deflection, the reframing, the ability to talk his way out of anything, all of it turned to ash in his mouth. Because you cannot talk your way out of the truth when the truth is standing in front of a room full of witnesses wearing a gown the color of quiet power. And then Lauren Hayes, who had been standing beside Michael this entire time, made a sound. A small, involuntary sound, the sound of a woman watching the ground open up beneath the man she had bet her future on. She took a half step away from him. It was tiny. It was instinctive. But Michael felt it. He felt her weight shift away from him, and he understood in that instant exactly what Lauren was. Not a partner, not a love, an investor who had just watched her stock collapse. "Lauren," he said, turning to her. But Lauren was not looking at him anymore. Lauren was looking at Nathaniel Sterling, at Claire Sterling, at the 200 most powerful people in Chicago, and Lauren was doing exactly the kind of rapid cold calculation that Michael himself had taught her to do. She was calculating how to survive this. And the answer she arrived at did not include him. "Michael, I think I should go," she whispered. Go where Lauren don't." "I'll call you," she said, which every human being in that room understood meant she would never call him again. And she gathered herself and slipped backward into the crowd, and just like that, the woman he had thrown his marriage away for evaporated at the first sign of trouble. 3 weeks. His new life had lasted 3 weeks. Michael watched her disappear, and something in his chest caved in. Because Claire had stood beside him for 8 years through failure and poverty and terror, and Lauren could not stand beside him for 8 minutes. Across the room, David Chen watched all of this with an expression that was not triumph and was not pity, but something in between the face of a man watching a prophecy he tried to prevent come true anyway. Nathaniel Sterling let the moment breathe. He was a patient man. He had built his fortune on knowing exactly when to speak and when to let silence do the work. And when he judged that Michael had absorbed enough, he spoke again, and now his voice was almost gentle, which was somehow more terrifying than anger. "Mr. Bennett, I want you to understand something because I think it's the only thing that might ever get through to you." He walked closer. "For 3 weeks, I have had the power to end you. Completely. I could have bought your debt. I could have called the men behind your Redmond deal, all of whom answer to me eventually, and had them walk away this morning. I could have made certain that by tonight you owned nothing but the suit on your back. I want you to sit with that. I have been able to erase you as easily as you erased my niece from your company records." Michael's face went white. "The Redmond deal." "We'll get to Redmond," Nathaniel said. "Oh, we will absolutely get to Redmond. But first I want you to know why I haven't destroyed you. Do you want to know why a man who could turn your entire life to dust chose not to—" He glanced at Claire. "It's because she asked me not to." Michael turned to look at his ex-wife. "That's right," Nathaniel said. 3 weeks ago, I sat across from her and I offered to burn everything you have to the ground and hand you the ashes. I offered to do it in her name so that the last thought in your head would be that the woman you called worthless was the one who ended you. And do you know what she said?" Nathaniel's voice dropped. "She said no. She said she didn't want revenge. She said she just wanted the truth. This woman you humiliated, held a knife over your throat and chose to set it down. And you stood in this very room an hour ago telling investors that you built your life alone." He shook his head slowly. "You've never in your life understood what was standing next to you." Michael looked at Claire, and his eyes were wet now, and it was not an act because for the first time in years, the mask had been ripped so completely off his face that there was nothing left to perform with. "Claire, he began. "Not here," Claire said quietly. "Whatever you're about to say, not here, not in front of all these people. That would just be one more performance, Michael, and I'm done watching you perform." She glanced around the room. "These people don't need to watch you apologize. They need to understand what actually happened. That's why I came, not for you, for the truth." And then Nathaniel Sterling turned to address the entire room, and what he did next was the twist that no one, least of all Michael, had seen coming. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nathaniel said, "many of you came here today because you heard I might attend. Some of you came hoping to do business with the Sterling family, and I want to be direct with you because my time is valuable, and so is yours. The Sterling family is prepared to make a significant investment in the future of this city's technology sector, a very significant one." A current of hunger moved visibly through the crowd. "But we will not be investing in Michael Bennett's company. Not as it is currently structured. Not while it is run by a man who fired the only person who ever made it worth anything." Michael felt the floor tilt. "However," Nathaniel continued, and he let the word hang there. I do believe there is real value in what that company was built on, because I've seen the true architecture of it. I've seen who designed the strategies. I've seen who caught the mistakes that would have killed it in year 2, year 3, year 5. I've read the emails. And so the Sterling family is prepared to invest, heavily, on one condition. He looked directly at Claire, that the person who actually built this company is the person who leads it forward. The room erupted not in noise, but in the frantic electric energy of 200 powerful people, all realizing at once that the world had just reorganized itself, that the quiet woman they had never noticed was suddenly the most important person in the building, that fortunes were about to be made and lost based on whose side they landed on in the next 60 seconds. And Michael, standing in the wreckage of everything he had ever believed about himself, understood the full and terrible shape of what was happening. It was not that Claire had come to destroy him, that he could have understood, that he could have fought. No, Claire had come to reveal him. And there is no fighting revelation. You cannot argue with the truth once it is standing in the light. The company he thought was his had never really been his. The empire he had built alone had never been built alone, and the woman he had needed most was the very woman he had convinced the world he never needed at all. Claire, he said, and his voice was barely a whisper now, all the arrogance drained out of it, leaving behind something almost like the young man she had married. Please, I know I have no right, but please, just tell me. Did you plan this? All of it was this always the plan? To wait, and then to walk in here and take everything. And Claire looked at him with an expression of such profound sadness that it silenced the room all over again. Michael, she said, do you hear yourself even now, even standing here? You still think this is about you? She shook her head slowly. There was no plan. I signed your papers, and I went home, and I cried, and I grieved, and I tried to figure out how to build a life out of the pieces you left me. That's all I was trying to do. Survive. My uncle is the one who looked into your company because he wanted to know if the man I'd given 8 years to was worth it. And when he found out what you'd done, when he found out you deleted me, he came to me with an offer to destroy you. And I told him no. Her voice broke just slightly. I didn't come here to take everything from you, Michael. I came here because I was tired of disappearing. I've disappeared my whole life. I disappeared behind a fake name to be loved, and then I disappeared behind you so you could take all the credit, and I am done. Do you understand? I am done being invisible. That's all this is. A woman who finally decided to stop hiding. It was never about you at all. And that more than the bankruptcy that was coming, more than the public humiliation, more than losing his company was the thing that broke Michael Bennett. Because for 8 years he had believed he was the center of the story. He had believed Claire's whole existence orbited around his greatness. And now in front of everyone, she had told him the truth that was more devastating than any revenge. He was not the center of her story. He had never been. He was just the man who had been too blind to see the sun standing next to him, and she had finally decided to shine with or without him. The summit dissolved into chaos after that, the controlled, expensive chaos of the very wealthy. Investors who had ignored Claire for years suddenly found reasons to be near her. People who had laughed at Michael's jokes an hour ago now avoided his eyes. And Michael stood alone in the middle of it all, a king watching his court walk away from him one handshake at a time, and the loneliest man in a room of 200 people. But the story was not finished, because Nathaniel Sterling had promised they would get to Redmond, and Nathaniel Sterling was a man who kept his promises. He crossed the room to where Michael stood abandoned, and he lowered his voice so that only Michael could hear him, and what he said next drained the last color from Michael's face. "That deal you're closing this afternoon," Nathaniel said quietly. "Redmond, you should know that my analysts flagged it in a single afternoon. The debt structure is a trap, Mr. Bennett. It's designed to look like growth and function like a noose. If you close it, and if the market moves against you even slightly, and it will then, within 12 months, you will lose everything. Not just the company, everything. Your home, your name, the whole illusion." He paused. "Your friend Mr. Chen tried to tell you this, repeatedly. You called him an anchor, I believe, the same word you used for my niece." Michael's eyes darted across the room to David, who met his gaze steadily. "How do you know that?" Michael whispered. "How do you know what I said to David?" "Because when a man is drowning," Nathaniel said, "the people who tried to save him tend to find each other." He straightened his jacket. "Here is the situation you are in, Mr. Bennett, and I am going to lay it out plainly because you have never in your life understood a thing until it was too late. In 1 hour, you have a choice. You can walk into that side room and close the Redmond deal, and you can hold on for a few more months to the fantasy that you are a self-made emperor. And then it will collapse and you will lose everything, and no one in this city will lift a finger to catch you because they all just watched you snub in this very room. Or," Nathaniel let the word land, "you can walk away from Redmond. You can admit the deal was a mistake, and you can let the truth of what your company actually is and who actually built it come into the light." "And if I do that," Michael said slowly, "what happens to me, that," Nathaniel said, "is up to her." He nodded toward Claire. And Michael understood finally the full and complete reversal of his life. 3 weeks ago, he had held all the power. He had slid papers across a table and decided his wife's fate with a smile. And now in this room, in front of everyone, his entire future rested in the hands of the woman he had discarded. Not because she had seized power over him, but because he had spent 8 years handing her the very tools that would have saved him and then thrown her away. And now the only person in the world with the knowledge and the standing and the reason to help him was the one person he had wronged the most. He looked at Claire across the crowded room, and he did something he had not done in years, something he had genuinely forgotten how to do. He stopped performing. He stopped calculating. He walked toward her slowly, past the investors and the whispers and the wreckage of his reputation. And when he reached her, he did not offer a speech. He did not offer a defense. He simply stood in front of her, stripped of everything he had used to hide behind, and he said the truest words he had spoken in 8 years. "You were right about all of it," he said. "The contracts, the mistakes, the Redmond deal, you would have caught it. You always caught everything. And I spent years telling everyone I did it alone because I was terrified that if I admitted the truth, if I admitted I needed you, then it would mean I wasn't the man I told everyone I was." His voice shook. "I didn't call you worthless because you were worthless, Claire. I called you worthless because you were the only person who knew I wasn't." The room had gone quiet again. Even the investors had stopped moving. Claire looked at him for a long, long moment. And whatever she saw in his face, it was enough to make her own composure finally crack just a little, just enough for a single tear to escape and run down her cheek. Because she had waited 8 years to hear him say those words, and now that he had finally said them, she understood something that was almost unbearable. It was too late. Not because she wanted revenge, not because she was cruel, but because you cannot unknow a truth once you've learned it, and she had learned that the man she loved could only tell the truth after he had lost everything that made the lie worthwhile. "I believe you," she said softly. "I believe that you mean it. And that might be the saddest part of all, Michael. Because you couldn't say it when it would have saved us. You could only say it when there was nothing left to protect." She wiped the tear away. "I'm not going to destroy you. I already told my uncle that, and I meant it. But I'm also not going to save you the way I used to by disappearing so you could look strong. Those days are over. If you want to survive what's coming, you're going to have to do the one thing you've never done in your entire life." "What?" Michael whispered. "Tell the truth," Claire said. "Out loud, in front of all these people. Walk into that room and kill the Redmond deal, and then come back out here and tell every person in this ballroom the real story of how your company was built. Not the story where you did it alone, the true one." Her eyes held his. "Do that, and I'll consider helping you rebuild something honest. Refuse, and I'll walk out that door and you'll never see me again. And you'll lose everything within the year, exactly the way my uncle said you will. That's the choice. And Michael." She stepped closer, and her voice dropped so that it was only for him. "For once in your life, it's not a choice about power or image or what people will think. It's a choice about who you actually are. So who are you? The man who threw me across a table, or the man who used to whisper, 'We did it when he still had a soul'?" And she stepped back, and she folded her hands, and she waited. The entire ballroom waited. Nathaniel Sterling waited, his face unreadable. David Chen across the room waited, hardly daring to breathe. And Michael Bennett stood at the exact center of his own reckoning, with the Redmond deal in one direction and the truth in the other, with everything he had ever pretended to be on one side and everything he had thrown away on the other, and he understood that whatever he did in the next 60 seconds would define not just his company, not just his fortune, but the answer to the only question that had ever really mattered, the question he had spent his entire life running from. Who was he when the applause stopped and the lie fell away, and the only thing left standing in front of him was the woman he had wronged and the truth he had buried? He looked at Claire. He looked at the door to the room where the Redmond deal was waiting. He looked back at Claire. And then, with 200 of the most powerful people in Chicago watching with his entire life balanced on a knife's edge, Michael Bennett opened his mouth to give his answer. "I'll do it," Michael said. The words came out quiet, almost inaudible, but in that silent ballroom they landed like a gunshot. 200 people heard them. And Michael himself heard them, and he was almost as shocked as everyone else, because for the first time in his adult life, he had made a decision that was not calculated to make him look good. It was simply true. "I'll kill the Redmond deal," he said louder now, "and I'll tell them the truth, all of it." Claire's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes shifted, a flicker of something she quickly buried, because she had learned long ago not to trust Michael's promises until they had survived contact with his pride. "Then go," she said simply. "The room's that way. I'll be right here when you come out." Michael turned. And here is the thing that nobody in that ballroom understood except Nathaniel Sterling, who watched with the careful eyes of a man who had spent a lifetime reading the exact moment a person breaks. Walking into that side room to kill the Redmond deal was for Michael harder than losing his marriage, because the Redmond deal was the last brick holding up the entire cathedral of the lie he had built about himself. Kill it. And he was admitting that David was right, that Claire was right, that the great self-made emperor had been about to walk off a cliff because he was too arrogant to look down. Every step toward that door was a step away from the only identity he had ever known. He reached the door. He put his hand on it, and he hesitated. And in that hesitation, the old Michael surged back up from somewhere deep inside the Michael who had spent 8 years erasing his wife's name from documents, and a voice in his head hissed at him. "You don't have to do this. You can still close Redmond. You can still be somebody. You don't need her. You never needed her. Walk in there and sign and figure out the rest later the way you always have." He stood frozen with his hand on that door for what felt like an hour. And then across the room he heard David Chen's voice. Not loud, just enough. "Michael," David said, "I begged you not to close it. Remember, I stood in that hallway and I begged you. So I'm going to say the same thing one more time as your friend for the last time. Walk away from Redmond." A pause. "Don't make me watch you choose the lie again." And something about David's voice, the exhaustion in it, the 8 years of loyalty in it, the fact that David was still trying to save him, even after everything cut through the poison in Michael's head. He thought about Lauren, who had vanished at the first sign of trouble. And he thought about David, who was still standing there fighting for him. And he thought about Claire, who had held a knife over his throat and set it down. And he understood in a single searing moment of clarity that he had spent his entire life mistaking the people who flattered him for allies and the people who challenged him for enemies. He had gotten it exactly backward, every single time. He opened the door and walked in. The Redmond team was waiting, 4 executives and a lawyer, and a stack of documents an inch thick, all smiles, all handshakes, all ready to close the deal that would supposedly make Michael Bennett a global name. "Michael," the lead Redmond man said, rising. "We were starting to wonder. Everything all right out there? We heard Sterling himself showed up. That's fantastic timing. We should—" "I'm not signing," Michael said. The room went still. "I'm sorry, what—" "The deal's dead," Michael said. His voice was shaking, but it did not stop. "The debt structure is a trap. I've known it for a while, honestly. I had people warning me for weeks, and I ignored them because I wanted the deal more than I wanted the truth. But I'm not going to sign a noose and call it a necklace. So no, there's no deal. I'm walking away." The lead Redmond man's smile curdled into something ugly. You understand you're throwing away the biggest opportunity of your career. You understand what this does to your reputation. People are going to say, Michael Bennett got cold feet. People are going to say you couldn't close. Let them say it, Michael said. And even as he said it, he felt something strange happening inside his chest. A loosening, a lightness, the same lightness he had felt on the morning he decided to divorce Claire. Except this time, it was not the lightness of a man abandoning his conscience. It was the lightness of a man picking it back up after 8 years of carrying nothing at all. Let them say whatever they want. I'd rather be a man who walked away from a bad deal than a man who signed a good-looking lie. And he walked out of that room, and he left the biggest deal of his career dead on the table behind him, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt clean. But the hardest part was still ahead of him, and he knew it. He walked back into the ballroom, and every eye turned to him, and Claire was standing exactly where she said she would be, and Nathaniel was beside her with an expression Michael could not read. "It's done," Michael said. "Redmond's dead. I killed it." A murmur moved through the crowd. Some of it was shock. Some of it, Michael realized with a jolt, was something else, something like respect. Because in that room full of people who worshipped winners, there was a strange and grudging admiration for a man who had just publicly walked away from a fortune to avoid signing a lie. But Claire did not congratulate him. She simply nodded once and said the words he had been dreading. "Now the rest," she said, "the truth, out loud, to all of them." Michael looked out at the 200 faces, the investors, the reporters he now noticed at the edges of the room, phones already recording, the people he had spent years lying to. And he understood that killing Redmond had been easy compared to this because Redmond was just money and this was his whole identity, the beautiful fiction of the self-made man. The story he had told so many times he had come to believe it himself. He almost couldn't do it. He stood there and his mouth went dry, and the old instinct to spin, to reframe, to find the version of the story that made him look good, rose up one final time. And then he looked at Claire, and he stopped fighting himself. "My name is Michael Bennett," he began, and his voice carried across the silent room. "And for 8 years, I've told all of you a story about how I built my company alone, about how nobody handed me anything, about how I was a self-made man." He swallowed. It was a lie. Every word of it was a lie. The room did not breathe. "When I started, I was nothing. I had big dreams and empty pockets, and I was about to fail the way most people fail, quietly and completely. And then I met a woman." He looked at Claire and his voice cracked. "She reviewed my contracts when I couldn't afford a lawyer. She stayed awake with me through 3 failed projects. In our 3rd year, my own attorneys missed a clause in a deal that would have handed my entire technology platform to a competitor, and she found it at 4 a.m, circled it in red, and saved my company before I even knew it was dying. Every major investor I ever landed in those early years, she's the one who opened the door. Every disaster I avoided, she's the reason I avoided it." He drew a shaking breath. "And then when the company got successful, I did something I will be ashamed of until the day I die. I erased her. I took her name off the documents. I told the story as if I'd done it alone. I even convinced myself it was true. And 3 weeks ago, I slid divorce papers across a table and I looked the woman who built my company in the eye and I called her worthless." Somewhere in the crowd, a person actually gasped. "Her name," Michael said, "is Claire Sterling, and she is the smartest, most decent person I have ever known, and everything good that has my name on it should have had hers. I stand here in front of all of you, a fraud who finally ran out of places to hide. That's the truth. That's the whole truth. I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to be able to say it." And then he stopped, because there was nothing left to say, and he stood there emptied out and exposed in front of the most powerful people in the city, waiting for the laughter, waiting for the contempt, waiting for the world to finally see what a fraud he was. But that is not what happened. Because here is a thing about the truth that Michael had never understood, a thing that Claire had tried to teach him for 8 years without ever getting through. The truth spoken plainly has a power that no performance can match. And the room full of people who lied to each other professionally every single day, who spun and postured and performed for a living, was utterly disarmed by the sight of a man telling the naked, humiliating truth about himself with nothing to gain from it. Nobody laughed. The silence stretched. And then slowly Claire walked toward him. She stopped in front of him, and she looked at him for a long moment, and Michael braced himself because he did not know what she was going to do, and he had learned that he no longer had the right to guess. "That's the man I married," Claire said quietly so only he could hear. "Right there. That man who just told the truth. I haven't seen him in 6 years. I'd started to think he was dead." Her voice trembled. "I don't know if he can stay. I don't know if you can be him for more than one afternoon in front of a crowd. But I saw him. And that matters to me. It matters more than you know." Michael's eyes filled. "Claire, But it doesn't change what happens next," Claire said, and her voice hardened, not with cruelty, but with a boundary, a line she had spent 8 years failing to draw and was finally drawing now. "You told the truth today, and I'm proud of you for it. But the truth doesn't erase the years. It doesn't erase you deleting me from my own life's work. It doesn't erase Lauren. It doesn't erase Worthless. Being honest for one afternoon doesn't earn back 8 years of erasing me. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes," Michael whispered. "I understand." "Good," Claire said, "because I need you to hear the next part with your whole heart, and not with the part of you that's already trying to figure out how to win me back." And then Claire delivered the twist that reorganized the entire situation, and it landed on Michael harder than anything Nathaniel had said, harder than the collapse of Redmond, harder even than the revelation of her name. "My uncle and I are going to invest in your company," she said. "We're going to save it. The Sterling family is going to put the capital in that keeps it alive and takes it global, the exact thing you've been chasing for years." Michael stared at her, uncomprehending. You're saving it after everything." "Yes," Claire said, "but not for you, Michael. That's the part I need you to understand. We're not saving it for you." She gestured out at the ballroom, at the offices beyond it, at the whole enterprise. "There are 400 people who work at your company. 400 people with mortgages and kids and lives, 400 people who did nothing wrong. And if that company collapses because of your ego, they're the ones who suffer, not you. You'll land somewhere. You always do. But the woman in accounting who's been there since year 2, the young engineers who believed in the mission, the single father in sales, they lose everything. So we're going to save the company. For them." Her eyes held his. "And for me. Because I built it too. And I'm not going to let my life's work die just because the man running it forgot who really made it." Michael understood then with a slow dawning horror that was also strangely a kind of relief exactly what had happened to him. He had lost. He had lost completely. But he had not been destroyed. He had been reduced. The company would survive, but it would survive because of Claire, and everyone would know it, and he would spend the rest of his career as the man who nearly killed the thing his wife built. It was the perfect justice, and the cruel thing about it was that it wasn't cruel at all. It was simply the truth, finally allowed to determine the outcome. "There's a condition," Nathaniel Sterling said, stepping forward. He had been watching this entire exchange with the patience of a man who owned time itself. "The Sterling family does not invest in companies run by men we don't trust. And Mr. Bennett, I don't trust you. Not yet, perhaps not ever. So here are the terms, and they are not negotiable." He let the weight of the moment settle. "Claire becomes the chief executive of the company, effective immediately. You keep a role. Founder advisor, whatever title lets you keep some dignity. But she runs it. She has final say on every strategic decision. And every warning she gives you, every no, she says you will listen to, because the last time you ignored her warnings, you nearly destroyed 400 lives." Nathaniel's eyes were cold as winter. "You spent 8 years pretending she wasn't the brain of your company. Now she'll be the brain of it in title as well as in truth. That's the deal. Take it and your company lives, and your people keep their jobs. Refuse it, and I let Redmond's collapse play out from a distance, and I watch you lose everything, and I don't lose a moment of sleep. You have 30 seconds. The room held its breath, and Michael, standing there with the last shreds of his pride in his hands, faced the final and most complete humiliation of the entire day. Because Nathaniel was not just asking him to accept help, he was asking him to publicly hand the company he had claimed to build alone to the woman he had claimed did nothing. He was asking Michael to make the lies collapse permanent and official and legal. Every day for the rest of his career, Michael would walk into that office and see Claire Sterling's name on the door where his used to be, and he would know exactly why it was there. It was the hardest thing anyone had ever asked him to do. He looked at Claire, and he searched her face for some sign of triumph, some flash of the vindication she was surely entitled to, some evidence that this was the revenge she had claimed not to want. And he found none. He found only that same steady, sad, patient gaze, the gaze of a woman who was not enjoying his downfall, who took no pleasure in his humiliation, who was simply finally doing the right thing, whether or not it happened to also be the just thing. And that, more than anything else, was what broke the last of Michael's resistance. Because if she had been gloating, he could have refused out of spite. If she had been cruel, he could have called it revenge and walked away with his wounded pride intact. But she wasn't. She was just right. She had always been right. And the only dignified thing left for him to do, the only thing that even resembled the man he wanted to be, was to say yes. "I accept," Michael said. "All of it. Claire runs the company. I'll follow her lead." And then quieter, just to her, "You should have been running it from the beginning. We both know that. I just wasn't brave enough to admit it." Claire closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, there was a single tear on her cheek, and Michael understood that it was not a tear of victory. It was a tear of grief. Grief for the 8 years. Grief for the marriage. Grief for the man he could have been if he'd found this honesty 6 years earlier, when it might have saved not just the company, but the two of them. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, Michael. Then we have a lot of work to do." Nathaniel Sterling clapped his hands together once, and the sound broke the spell over the room, and just like that, the tension shattered into the ordinary chaos of business. Lawyers materialized. Investors surged forward, suddenly desperate to be part of a Sterling-backed company, led by a Sterling, the very people who had turned their backs on Michael an hour ago, now clamoring to shake Claire's hand. Reporters typed frantically. The story of the day, the story that would be all over the financial press by nightfall, was already writing itself. The quiet wife who turned out to be a Sterling. The self-made man who confessed he'd built nothing alone. The billionaire's private jet. The public reckoning. And in the middle of all of it stood Claire, no longer invisible, no longer hiding behind a fake name or a husband's shadow, finally, completely, undeniably seen. But there was one more moment in that ballroom that mattered more than all the deals and all the headlines, and it happened in a quiet corner while the chaos swirled around them. David Chen found Michael standing alone, watching Claire work the room, watching her be everything he had spent 8 years pretending she wasn't. "You did the right thing," David said quietly. "Killing Redmond, telling the truth, taking the deal. I didn't think you had it in you, honestly." "Neither did I," Michael admitted. He was quiet for a moment. "David, I called you an anchor. I said you didn't have the stomach for where the company was going. After 8 years of you having my back." He shook his head. "Why are you even still standing here?" David considered the question. "Because I remember who you used to be," he said. "Before the money, before the profiles calling you a genius. You used to be a guy who bought his wife cheap flowers because that's all he could afford, and who couldn't stop smiling when a deal closed because he couldn't believe his luck. Somewhere along the way, that guy got buried under a pile of press clippings." David clapped him on the shoulder. "Maybe he's still in there. Today's the first time I've seen him in years." Michael's throat tightened. "I don't know if I can be him again, David. I don't know if I even know how." "Nobody does," David said. "You just try, every day. And you let the people who actually love you tell you when you're getting it wrong." He glanced across the room at Claire. "You just handed the company to the one person on earth who's earned the right to tell you no. If you're smart, and I mean actually smart, not the fake genius smart you've been faking, you'll spend the rest of your life listening to her." And Michael, watching his ex-wife stand in the light she had been denied for 8 years, understood that David was right. understood that the greatest gift left to him was not the survival of his company or his fortune or his name. It was the chance, however slim, however undeserved, to become the kind of man who could stand next to a person like Claire without needing to make her smaller. He did not know yet whether he could do it. The old Michael was not dead. He could feel him still coiled somewhere inside, whispering that this was all a humiliation, that he had been beaten, that a real man would have found a way to win. The work of becoming someone new would not be finished in a ballroom in a single afternoon. It would take years, and it would be the hardest thing he ever did, harder than building the company, harder than any deal. But for today in this room, he had told the truth. He had walked away from the lie. He had handed the crown to the person who had always deserved it. And that was a beginning. Across the room, as the investors clamored, and the reporters scribbled, and the whole world reorganized itself around her, Claire Sterling caught Michael's eye for just a moment through the crowd. She did not smile. It was too soon and too complicated and too full of grief for smiling. But she gave him a small nod, an acknowledgement, a recognition that whatever came next, something real had happened here today, something true after 8 years of lies. And Michael nodded back. Then Claire turned back to the work, to the 400 people whose livelihoods she had just decided to save, to the company she would now rebuild in the open as the person who had always secretly built it. She had walked into that ballroom, a discarded wife, with a signed divorce decree and a borrowed name. She would walk out of it as the chief executive of a company she was owed, the acknowledged architect of everything that had been stolen from her, and more importantly than any title, as a woman who had finally permanently stopped disappearing. The truth had stood up in the light. She had not needed to hold the match. She had only needed to stop hiding it. And now, in the bright and merciless clarity of that revelation, everyone in that room could see what had been true all along, what Michael had spent 8 years and an entire marriage refusing to see. The woman he called worthless had been the most valuable person in every room she had ever quietly stood in the back of, and she was done standing in the back. The morning Claire Sterling walked into the company as its chief executive, the whole building held its breath. Word had traveled fast, the way it always does. By the time she arrived, every one of the 400 employees knew the story. They knew about the ballroom. They knew about the private jet. They knew that the quiet woman some of them had passed in the hallway for years, the one they'd assumed was just the founder's wife, who occasionally stopped by, was in fact a Sterling, and that she was now the person who signed their paychecks. And they did not know what to expect from her, because the last powerful person who ran this building had spent 8 years teaching them that power meant cruelty. Claire felt the fear in the room the moment she stepped off the elevator. She could see it in the way people avoided her eyes, in the way conversations died, as she passed, in the way a young woman near the reception desk actually flinched when Claire looked in her direction. And it broke Claire's heart, because she recognized that flinch. She had lived inside that flinch for 8 years. She knew exactly what it was to work for a person who might at any moment decide you were worthless. So the first thing Claire Sterling did as chief executive was something no one expected. She did not go to the corner office. She did not call a board meeting. She walked into the middle of the main floor where hundreds of people sat at their desks, pretending not to watch her, and she stopped and she spoke. "I know you're all afraid of me," she said, and her voice carried without her needing to raise it the same quiet strength that had once caught a fatal clause at 4 a.m. "You have every reason to be. You've learned that the people who run this place can decide your worth on a whim. You've watched good people get erased. Some of you have been erased." She paused. "I know because I was erased too. For 8 years, I did a great deal of the work that built this company, and I watched my name get taken off of it, and I was told I was dead weight. So I understand your fear better than you think. And I'm here to tell you that those days are over, not because I'm asking you to trust me. Trust is earned, and I haven't earned yours yet, but I'm going to. Watch what I do, not what I say. Watch what I do and decide for yourselves." And then she did something that reorganized the entire culture of that company in a single gesture. She turned to the young woman who had flinched, and she asked her name. "Emma," the young woman said, barely audible. "Emma, what do you do here?" I'm in accounts, junior analyst." How long? 2 years. 2 years, Claire repeated. So you were here for the Brennan contract then, last spring, the one that almost went sideways. Emma's eyes widened. You know about that? I know that a junior analyst caught a discrepancy in the Brennan numbers that would have cost this company $2 million, Claire said. And I know that when she flagged it, she got told to stay in her lane, and the credit for catching it went to a senior manager. That was you, wasn't it, Emma? The floor had gone completely silent. Emma's face had turned red, and her eyes were filling because in 2 years, no one had ever acknowledged what she had done. Yes, Emma whispered, that was me. I read every incident report from the last 3 years before I walked in here this morning. Claire said loud enough for the whole floor to hear. All of them. I know who actually catches the problems in this building, and I know who takes the credit, and I promise you, those 2 lists are going to start matching up. She turned to the whole floor. Emma is being promoted, effective today, because in this company, from this day forward, the person who does the work is the person who gets the name on it. That's the only rule that matters to me. Everything else we'll figure out together. And the floor erupted. Not politely, not carefully. People stood up at their desks and clapped, and some of them were crying, and Emma sat frozen in the middle of it all with her hands over her mouth, and in the span of 90 seconds, Claire Sterling had done something Michael Bennett had failed to do in 8 years. She had made 400 people believe that their work mattered, that they were seen. Michael watched all of it from the edge of the floor. He had come in that morning not knowing what his role even was anymore, carrying a title founder that felt like a costume. And he had watched his ex-wife walk into the building he thought he owned, and in the space of a few minutes win the loyalty of every person in it more completely than he had managed in almost a decade. And the thing that struck him, the thing that lodged in his chest like a splinter, was that she had done it without cruelty. She had not humiliated him to earn their love. She had not stood up and listed his sins. She had simply been decent out loud in front of everyone, and it turned out that decency was a kind of power he had never once thought to try. He caught up with her later in the corner office that used to be his and was now hers. That was, he started and stopped because he did not have the words. What you did out there, with Emma. I didn't even know who Emma was, Claire. 2 years she's worked 20 feet from my office and I never knew her name. I know, Claire said. She was not being cruel. She was just being honest, which from her was somehow worse. That's the whole problem, Michael. That was always the whole problem. You didn't see people. You saw resources. And resources are disposable. People aren't. Michael sat down slowly across from her. How did you know about the Brennan contract? About Emma catching it? You've been gone. How could you possibly know that? Claire looked at him for a long moment, deciding how much to say. And then she told him the truth because she was done with anything else. Because for the last 3 years, Michael, even after I stopped coming to the strategy sessions, even after you erased me, I never actually left. Her voice was quiet. I still had access to the internal systems. You never revoked it. Probably never even thought about it. And every night after you went to sleep, believing you'd built everything alone, I'd sit up and read the reports. I watched this company from the shadows for 3 years. I watched you make mistake after mistake, and I couldn't say anything because you'd made it so clear you didn't want to hear from me. So I just watched, and I grieved. I watched the company I loved get run into the ground by a man who wouldn't listen, and I couldn't do a single thing about it because the moment I opened my mouth, you'd remind me that I was dead weight. Michael felt sick. You watched, for 3 years, silently. Every night, Claire said. Why? Why would you do that to yourself? And here, Claire's composure finally slipped, just for a moment, and Michael saw underneath it the full depth of what he had done to her. Because I loved it, Michael, she said, and her voice broke. The company. I loved it. I helped build it from nothing, and even after you took my name off of it, it was still partly mine in here. She pressed a hand to her chest. You could erase me from the documents. You couldn't erase what I felt for the thing we made. So I watched over it the only way I was allowed to. From the dark, like a ghost in my own house. She wiped her eyes and steadied herself. So yes, I know about Emma. I know about Brennan. I know about every good person in this building you overlooked because I've been watching them try and get ignored for 3 years. And now, finally, I get to do something about it. That's not revenge, Michael. That's a woman getting to protect the thing she loves out loud instead of in secret." Michael sat in stunned silence. He had thought the ballroom was the bottom. He had thought watching her win over the floor was the bottom. But this was the bottom, the image of Claire lying awake every night for 3 years, silently watching over a company that had erased her, loving it too much to abandon it and too wounded to save it. The loyalty of it was almost unbearable. He had married a woman who loved so completely that she kept protecting him even after he threw her away, and he had been too blind to notice she was still there. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make this right," he said quietly. "I know I can't. I know some things don't get made right, but I'm going to try." "Then start by learning their names," Claire said. "All 400 of them. That's your first assignment as founder. I want you to walk this floor every day and learn who these people are. Not what they do, who they are. It'll be the hardest thing you've ever done, and it'll teach you more than any deal ever did." And to his credit, Michael did it. Over the following weeks, the man who had once walked past his own employees without seeing them started stopping at desks. Awkwardly at first, stiffly. He did not know how to do it because he had spent his whole career treating people as functions. But he tried. He learned Emma's name, and the name of the single father in sales, and the name of the woman in accounting who'd been there since year 2, and slowly, clumsily, he began to become a person again. Meanwhile, the company began to heal, and it healed fast because it turned out that the only thing that had ever been broken about it was the man at the top. With Claire making the decisions, the disasters stopped. The Redmond trap was behind them. The strategies she'd been silently watching go wrong for 3 years, she now got to fix in daylight. Investors who had fled came back drawn by the sterling name and kept by Claire's obvious brilliance. And the 400 employees who had spent years working in fear discovered what it felt like to work for someone who protected them. But not everything was smooth, and Claire knew it wouldn't be, because a story does not end just because the villain repents. And the sharpest test was still coming. It arrived one afternoon in the form of Lauren Hayes. Lauren, who had vanished from the ballroom at the first sign of trouble, who had told Michael she'd call and never did, walked back into the building 6 weeks later as if nothing had happened and asked to see Claire. Not Michael, Claire. Because Lauren, whatever else she was not stupid, and she had correctly identified who now held the power. Claire agreed to see her, which surprised everyone. Lauren came into the office with a carefully constructed expression of contrition, and she sat down and she began a speech she had clearly rehearsed. "Claire, I owe you an apology," Lauren said. "What happened with me and Michael? It was wrong. I got caught up in something and I made a terrible mistake and I felt awful about it. And I want you to know that I've grown from it. I've reflected, and I'm hoping we can find a way to move forward professionally because I really do believe in this company and I have a lot to offer and—" "Lauren," Claire said, gently cutting her off, "you don't have to do this." Lauren blinked. "Do what?" "The performance," Claire said. There was no anger in her voice. That was what unsettled Lauren the most. The rehearsed apology, the reflection speech. "I've spent 8 years around a man who could talk his way out of anything, so believe me when I tell you I know a performance when I see one. You're not here because you're sorry. You're here because I have power now and Michael doesn't, and you follow power. That's who you are. And that's okay. I'm not going to lecture you about it." Lauren's careful expression cracked. "That's not—" "You left him in that ballroom," Claire said, "the second it got hard. He threw away 8 years of marriage for you, and you couldn't give him 8 minutes of loyalty when the ground got shaky. I watched you do it. And I want you to understand something, Lauren, because I think it might be the most useful thing anyone ever tells you." Claire leaned forward. "The way you treated Michael when he fell is exactly the way you'll treat everyone when they fall. And someday you're going to fall, everyone does, and you're going to look around for someone to catch you, and you're going to find that you spent your whole life being the kind of person who never caught anyone. And no one will be there. That's not a threat. That's not revenge. That's just how it works. The people who abandon others get abandoned, not because someone punishes them, because they taught everyone around them exactly what they're worth in a crisis. Lauren sat frozen, the color draining from her face, because she had come expecting a catfight, expecting jealousy, expecting the wronged wife. And instead she was getting something far more devastating, the calm, accurate, pitying assessment of a woman who saw straight through her and was not even angry about it. "So, no," Claire said, standing. "There's no job here for you. Not because I'm bitter, I'm not. I genuinely wish you well. But this company runs on people who show up for each other when it's hard, and that's the one thing you've proven you can't do." She walked to the door and opened it. "I hope you figure it out, Lauren. I really do. Before you run out of people willing to give you the chance." And Lauren Hayes walked out of that building for the last time, and the strange thing, the thing she would think about for years, was that she almost wished Claire had screamed at her, screaming she could have dismissed. But she couldn't dismiss the pity. The pity followed her home. The pity was the truest thing anyone had ever said to her. When Michael heard about the meeting, he came to Claire's office, and he was quiet for a long time. "You could have destroyed her," he said finally. "You had every right. She helped break our marriage, and you just let her walk out. You even wished her well." "I meant it too," Claire said. "How?" Michael asked, and there was real bewilderment in his voice. "How do you do that? After everything, how do you not want them to hurt the way they hurt you?" And Claire gave him an answer that he would carry for the rest of his life, an answer that finally explained the thing about her he had never understood in 8 years of marriage. "Because I figured out a long time ago that wanting people to hurt is a cage, Michael," she said. "It keeps you locked up with the person who hurt you forever. Every minute you spend wanting revenge is a minute you're still letting them live rent-free in your head, still letting them control you. Lauren hurt me. You hurt me worse than anyone ever has. And for a while in the dark, I wanted you both to suffer for it. I'm not going to pretend I didn't." She looked at him steadily. "But then I realized that if I built my new life on that, if I became a person who ran on revenge, then you'd win. Not you, Michael, exactly, but the whole thing that made you what you became. The bitterness, the need to make someone else smaller to feel big. If I let that into me, then I'd have survived you only to become you. And I would rather forgive 100 people who don't deserve it than turn into the thing that hurt me." Michael put his head in his hands. "That," he said, his voice muffled, "is the difference between us. That right there. I never understood it until this second. You had the power to destroy me, and you didn't, and I thought it was because you were being generous. But it's not generosity, is it? It's that you're built different. You looked at the exact thing that made me a monster, and you decided not to pick it up, even when you had every reason to." "It's not that I'm better than you, Michael," Claire said softly. "I want you to understand that. I'm not standing here thinking I'm some saint and you're some sinner. I've been petty. I've been angry. I lay awake plenty of nights hating you. The difference isn't that I don't feel it. The difference is what I decided to do with it, and you can decide differently too, starting now. It's not too late for you to become someone who doesn't need to win, but you have to want it more than you want to be right. And Michael wanting to be right has been the God you've worshipped your entire life." He looked up at her, and something passed between them, then something that was not romance because that was gone, and they both knew it, but something maybe deeper and stranger and rarer, understanding. For the first time in 8 years, Michael Bennett actually understood the woman he had married, understood that her quietness had never been weakness, that her lack of ambition had never been laziness, that the thing he had mistaken for smallness was in fact a largeness of soul so vast he had not been able to perceive its edges. She hadn't fought him for recognition because she genuinely did not need it. She hadn't demanded credit because her sense of her own worth had never depended on his. And he had spent 8 years standing next to the strongest person he had ever met, mistaking her strength for its opposite because her strength did not look like his. Hers was quiet. His was loud. And Loud had spent his whole life convincing him it was the only kind that counted. "I made the worst mistake a man can make," Michael said quietly. "I had the one thing everybody spends their whole life looking for, somebody who saw me at my worst and stayed, somebody who loved me when I had nothing, and I threw it away because loving me stopped being useful to my image." He laughed, a broken, hollow sound. You know what the cruelest part is? If I'd just been decent to you, if I'd just given you the credit you earned and treated you like a partner, you'd still be my wife. You never wanted the money or the name or any of it. You wanted to be seen, that's all. The cheapest thing in the world, and I couldn't afford to give it to you. Claire didn't answer because there was nothing to say. It was true, and some true things don't need a response. They just need to be sat with. The weeks turned into months, and the company thrived, and something remarkable happened that no one had predicted. It became, under Claire, one of the most sought-after places to work in the entire city. Not because of the pay, though the pay was good, because of the culture. Word got out that this was a company where the person who did the work got the credit, where honesty was rewarded instead of punished, where you did not have to make yourself invisible to survive. Claire built programs to protect the people who spoke up. She created channels for anyone at any level to challenge a decision without fear. She rewarded the people who told her no, because she, of all people, understood what it cost a company to have no one left who dared to. And the truth about Claire's contributions, the truth Michael had buried for years, came pouring out once people no longer had to be afraid. Former colleagues came forward. Old employees who'd left in frustration reached out to say what they'd always known, that Claire had been the smartest person in every room, that half the company's biggest wins had her fingerprints on them, that everyone who'd been paying attention had quietly wondered for years why the founder's wife seemed to understand the business better than the founder. She had never demanded the spotlight. She had simply finally stopped hiding from it, and the moment she did, everyone realized they'd known the truth all along. The business press, which had spent years writing profiles of Michael Bennett, the self-made visionary, now wrote a very different story. The story of Claire Sterling. Not the story of a wronged wife or a family fortune, though both were part of it, but the story of a brilliant woman who had spent almost a decade hiding her own light so that a man could shine, and who had finally decided to stop. It was a story that resonated with an enormous number of people, because an enormous number of people knew exactly what it felt like to do the work and watch someone else take the bow. And through all of it, Michael changed, slowly, painfully, imperfectly. There were days the old Michael surfaced, days he caught himself wanting credit, wanting to be the center, wanting to win. But now there was a difference. Now when that old self rose up, he noticed it. And more than once he caught himself in the act, and he stopped, and he chose differently. It was the hardest work of his life, harder than building the company, harder than any negotiation, because it was work with no applause and no finish line, the invisible daily labor of becoming a person who did not need to be seen in order to feel real. The very thing he realized that Claire had been doing quietly, effortlessly, for as long as he'd known her. One evening, months in, the two of them stayed late in the office going over the next quarter's strategy, and there was an ease between them that had not existed in years, the ease of two people who had finally stopped pretending. And Michael set down his pen and looked at her, and he asked the question that had been sitting in his chest since the ballroom. "Do you think," he said carefully, "that you'll ever forgive me? I'm not asking for anything, I know that's over. I'm just asking for me. Do you think it's even possible?" Claire considered the question honestly, because she owed him honesty and nothing less. "I think I already have," she said slowly. "Not because you earned it. You didn't, not yet, maybe not ever. But I forgave you for me, Michael, not for you. I let it go, because carrying it was too heavy, and I have too much left to do to spend my strength hating you." She paused. "But forgiving you and trusting you are two different things. And forgiving you and loving you are two different things. I've forgiven you. I don't hate you. God help me, I even like the man you're trying to become. But the woman who loved you, the one who stayed up at 4 a.m. saving your company because she believed in you, she's gone, Michael. You didn't just lose her love. You spent it. Slowly, over 8 years, one careless dismissal at a time, until there was nothing left. And you can't buy that back. Nobody can, not even with all my family's money." Michael nodded slowly, and it hurt, but it was a clean hurt, the hurt of a truth you needed to hear. "I understand," he said. "I know you do," Claire said. "That's the difference in you now. The old Michael would have argued. He'd have found an angle. He'd have tried to win me back like I was a deal. You're just letting it be true. That's growth. That's real. I see it. She gave him a small, sad smile. And I'm glad, Michael. I'm genuinely glad you're becoming someone better. Even if it's not for me. Maybe especially because it's not for me. Because that's the only kind of change that ever lasts, the kind you do when there's nothing left to gain. And Michael Bennett, the self-made man who had built nothing alone, sat in the office that was no longer his, across from the wife who was no longer his in the company he had nearly destroyed, and she had saved and understood that he had lost everything he thought mattered and been given in exchange. The only thing that ever truly did the truth about himself and a second chance to be someone worth knowing. It was not the life he had planned. It was not the empire he had dreamed of ruling alone. But it was real. For the first time in 8 years, all of it was real. And as he watched Claire bend back over the strategy documents, focused and brilliant and finally fully visible, he understood that the greatest thing he could do now, the only thing that would mean anything, was to spend the rest of his life making sure that the woman he had once called worthless never had to disappear again. She never would. Not anymore. The whole world could see her now, and the whole world was only just beginning to understand exactly how much it had been missing all along. A year to the day after Claire Sterling walked into that ballroom on her uncle's arm, she stood on a stage in front of 1,000 people, and the woman who had spent her whole life disappearing was about to be named the most influential business leader in the city. But to understand how she got to that stage, you have to understand the year that came between, because not everything went the way the headlines later claimed. 3 months after the ballroom, just as the company was finding its footing, a crisis arrived that no one saw coming. One of Redmond's biggest backers, the man Michael had publicly humiliated by killing the deal, decided he wanted revenge. His name was Harold Grange, and he was a man who had spent his entire life never hearing the word no and being turned down by a small Chicago company in front of the entire financial world was a humiliation he could not forgive. Grange started spreading rumors that Claire's company was drowning in secret debt, that the Sterling family was only propping up a sinking ship to save face, that Claire Sterling wasn't the genius everyone claimed, just a lucky heiress playing dress-up as a businesswoman, and the rumors spread fast the way rumors always do. One morning, Claire walked into the office and found David Chen waiting with a tight, worried face. "We've got a problem," David said. "Grange, he's telling everyone who'll listen that we're a fraud. 3 of our investors have already called asking if the rumors are true, and it gets worse. There's a reporter about to run a piece. An article saying your whole story, the overlooked wife who turned out to be a genius, was a PR stunt cooked up by the Sterling family to inflate the company's value before a sale." Claire sat down slowly. "They're saying I invented all of it. They're saying you and your uncle staged the entire thing," David said. "That Michael never really erased you, that it was all scripted to move stock." And this was where Claire's true character was tested harder than it had been in the ballroom, because she stood before 2 roads. She could use the full weight of the Sterling name to crush Harold Grange, to silence the reporter, to bury every hostile voice under money and influence. Uncle Nathaniel called her within the hour and said exactly that. "Say the word Claire," Nathaniel said over the phone. "Grange is leveraged to his eyeballs. I can have him underwater in a week, and that reporter, her paper belongs to a media group we hold a stake in. One call and the article disappears." And Claire once again stood at the edge of the exact temptation she had sworn she would never touch, the chance to solve a problem by becoming the very thing she despised. "No," Claire said. "Claire, no, Uncle. If I silence them with money, then I've proven them right. I become exactly the person they're describing, an heiress using her family's power to control the narrative. I won't do it." She paused. "I'm going to let the truth stand up on its own, the way I always have." "And if the truth isn't strong enough," Nathaniel asked, "if this time the world believes the lie, then I'll face that with the truth," Claire said. "Not with power." And then she did something no one expected. She called the very reporter who was about to destroy her, and she invited her in. Not to threaten her, not to buy her off, but to show her everything. The reporter, a sharp woman named Rachel Torres, arrived skeptical and ready for a fight. She had written enough stories about the rich hiding the truth that she no longer believed anyone with the name Sterling. "I know you think this is a stunt," Claire said the moment Rachel walked in, "so I'm not going to try to convince you with words. I'm going to give you everything, every file, every email, all thousands of them, all the proof of what Michael did, and more than that. I'm giving you unlimited access to every employee in this company. Talk to anyone you want. I won't be in the room. Look at any book you want. If this is a fraud, you'll find it. And if it isn't, you'll know." Rachel Torres stared at her. "You're giving me unrestricted access to your own company, to write a piece that could destroy you." "I'm giving you access to the truth," Claire said. "If the truth destroys me, then maybe I deserve to be destroyed, but I don't think it will, because I'm not lying." And Rachel Torres spent 3 weeks inside that company. She talked to Emma, who cried recounting the day Claire learned her name. She talked to the single father in sales who told her Claire had quietly rearranged his schedule so he could pick up his kids. She talked to the woman in accounting who'd been there since year 2, who showed her old emails proving Claire had been there, always been there, even when her name was scrubbed off the records. And she talked to Michael himself. That was the interview Rachel would never forget, because Michael, the man she'd come to expose as a co-conspirator, sat down across from her and told the truth so plainly and so brutally that it left her speechless. "You want to know if this was scripted," Michael said. "Let me be clear. If it were scripted, I'd have written it to make myself look better. Nobody volunteers to be the character who called his wife worthless and erased her from her own work. I'm the villain of this story, Miss Torres. I did things that make me sick when I remember them. And Claire didn't invent that to sell stock. She lived through it for 8 years because of me." Rachel set down her pen. "Why are you telling me this?" "You know I'll print it. It'll destroy your reputation for good." "My reputation died a year ago," Michael said calmly. "It died in that ballroom. What I'm building now isn't a reputation. It's decency. And the only way to have it is to tell the truth, even when the truth makes me look terrible, especially when it makes me look terrible." Rachel Torres's article, when it finally ran, was not the hit piece Harold Grange had hoped for. It became one of the most widely read stories of the year. Its headline was simple: "The woman a whole city overlooked." And it told the truth. The whole truth, independently verified, impossible to dispute. It shattered every one of Grange's rumors with the only weapon Claire had ever trusted, the naked truth standing upright, needing no one to defend it. Harold Grange retreated in silence. He had bet on Claire fighting dirty on her, using power on her, handing him the excuse to say, "See, they're just like us." Instead, she beat him with the one thing he had no defense against: total honesty. "I still don't understand," David said to Claire after it all settled. "You put the entire company in the hands of a reporter who came to destroy you. That's the craziest gamble I've ever seen. How did you dare?" "Because I don't gamble, David," Claire said. "A gamble is when you don't know the outcome. I knew the truth was on my side. The only person afraid of the light is the one with something to hide. I have nothing to hide, not anymore. That's the whole point of not disappearing. You stop being afraid of anyone looking at you." And that perhaps was the deepest lesson Claire taught everyone around her that year, that the greatest power isn't the ability to control the story. It's living a life where you don't need to control it. Living so honestly that no rumor can survive, because there's no gap between the person you present and the person you actually are. Michael watched all of it, and it changed him more deeply than the ballroom ever had. Because in the ballroom he'd learned he was wrong. But through the Grange affair, he learned something far harder. He learned the true cost of the road he'd once walked. His whole career he'd survived by controlling his image, spinning the story, making sure everyone saw his version of the truth. And it had turned him into a frightened man, a man who couldn't tolerate a man who had thrown away the love of his life because that love dared to tell him the truth. Claire was the opposite. She never controlled the story because she didn't need to. And that was exactly what made her untouchable, in a way all of Michael's money and power never had. One evening after the Grange storm had passed, Michael found Claire still at the office late, and he sat down across from her. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to let me finish before you answer. Okay?" Claire set down her pen. "Okay." All year I kept thinking that if I became a better man, if I worked hard enough, learned everyone's names, helped enough people, then someday I'd earn back what I did. That there was a destination, a finish line, where I'd finally be forgiven and everything would be okay. He drew a shaking breath. But I realized this week there is no finish line. I'll never earn it back. Those 8 years are gone. The woman who loved me is gone. And I have to live with that every single day until I die. There's no redemption waiting for me at the end of the road. Claire listened in silence. And the strange thing is, Michael continued, the moment I finally accepted that the moment I stopped doing good in order to be forgiven and started doing good just because it was good, that was the first time in my whole life I felt at peace. You tried to tell me this from the beginning, that the only change that lasts is the kind you make when there's nothing left to gain. I didn't understand it then. I do now. I'm not changing to win you back anymore, Claire. I know that's impossible. I'm changing because I finally don't want to be the man who called his wife worthless. Full stop. No reward. I just don't want to be him. And Claire, for the first time all year, reached across the table and laid her hand over his. Not love. That door had closed for good. But something maybe rarer still. A recognition. One human being seeing another human being truly change. That, she said softly, is the kindest thing you've ever said to me. And it's the first time you've said something without wanting anything from me. Do you see the difference? That's exactly the man you're becoming. And I'm proud of you, Michael. Not for you, because it's true. He wept, then not hiding it, and she let him. And in that room, the two people who had once destroyed each other found something on the far side of destruction that neither of them had dared to hope for. Not the repair of what was broken. That door stayed closed. But the building of something entirely new from the pieces. A friendship forged in fire. An understanding that could only exist between two people who had seen each other at their absolute worst and still chose to believe in each other's best. And it was from that foundation, the foundation of a truth that had survived the fire, that everything after was built. The award ceremony that was now upon her, the speech she was about to give, all of it grew out of that long, brutal year, the year Claire Sterling proved over and over that the truth needs no power to win. It only needs one brave person to stop hiding it. She hadn't wanted the award. That was the first thing to understand about who she'd become, or rather, who she'd always been, and finally let the world see. When the organization called to tell her she'd won, her first instinct was to decline to point them towards someone who wanted the recognition more. But her uncle Nathaniel, who had flown in for the ceremony, sat her down and said something that changed her mind. "Take it," Nathaniel said. "Not for you. I know you don't need it. Take it for every woman watching who's still standing in the back of a room doing the work, watching someone else take the bow. Take it so they can see that it doesn't have to stay that way. You spent your whole life hiding your light so that other people could feel bright. The most powerful thing you can do now is stand in it so the next Claire doesn't have to wait 8 years to be seen." So she took it. And when she walked onto that stage, the applause did not stop for a very long time, because half the people in that room worked at companies where they too had been overlooked, and they were not clapping for Claire Sterling, the executive. They were clapping for the idea that the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones who did the work in the dark, might finally get to walk into the light. Michael was in the audience. That, more than anything, was the measure of how far the story had traveled. A year earlier, he had called her worthless across a marble table. Now he sat in the third row, and when she won, he was the first one on his feet, and there were tears in his eyes. And they were not tears of jealousy or regret, but something cleaner, the tears of a man watching someone he had wronged receive at last exactly what she had always deserved. Claire stood at the podium and looked out at the 1,000 faces, and she found Michael's in the crowd, and she held his eyes for just a moment. And then she gave the speech that people in that city would repeat for years. "A little over a year ago," she began, "a man told me I was worthless. He was somebody I loved, and he said it to my face, and for a long time, if I'm honest, a small part of me believed him, because I'd spent years being invisible, and when you're invisible long enough, you start to wonder if maybe you really are as small as everyone treats you." She paused, and the room was utterly silent. "I'm telling you this not because I want your sympathy. I don't. I'm telling you because I know that somewhere in this room, Probably in a lot of places in this room, there are people who've heard some version of those words. Maybe not out loud. Maybe just in the way you get passed over. The way your ideas get repeated back to you in someone else's mouth. The way you learn to make yourself smaller so that someone louder can feel bigger. Heads were nodding across the room. Some people were crying. "So here is what I want you to know," Claire said. "The person who overlooks you is not telling you the truth about your worth. They're telling you the truth about their vision. My worth didn't disappear when he couldn't see it. It was there the whole time. It was there at 4 in the morning when I was catching the mistakes that saved a company I got no credit for. It was there through 8 years of being called dead weight. Your worth doesn't vanish just because someone lacks the eyes to see it. It just waits. It waits for the moment the world finally looks. And I am living proof that the moment comes. It came for me. It will come for you. Do not make yourself smaller while you wait for it. Do the work. Be excellent in the dark if you have to, but never ever believe the person who tells you that you're nothing, because that person is describing the limits of their sight, not the limits of your value." The room came apart. 1,000 people rose to their feet, and the sound was enormous, and Claire stood there in the middle of it, no longer hiding, no longer disappearing, finally, completely, permanently seen. And in the third row, Michael Bennett clapped until his hands hurt and understood with total clarity that the best thing he had ever done in his entire life was lose. Later after the ceremony, the two of them stood together off to the side, away from the crowd, and there was between them now the settled ease of people who had traveled through the worst of something and come out the other side, changed. "That speech," Michael said. "You were talking about me. Everyone knew it. And you didn't say my name. You didn't have to humiliate me to make your point." "I stopped needing you to be the villain a long time ago, Michael," Claire said. "The story's not about you anymore. It hasn't been for a while. That's what you never understood even at the end. You kept thinking the story was about the man who called his wife worthless. But it was never about him. It was always about the woman who found out she wasn't." Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question he'd been carrying all year, the one he'd been afraid to ask. "Are you happy, Claire? Actually happy, not successful, not vindicated, happy?" And Claire considered it honestly the way she considered everything. "I am," she said, and there was a lightness in her voice he hadn't heard in a decade. "Not because of the award, not because of the company, because I'm not pretending anymore. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to spend your life being smaller than you are, to hide your name, hide your mind, hide your worth, so that everyone around you can be comfortable? I did it for 20 years, Michael. First with my family's name, then with you, and I'm done. I get to be all of myself now, every part. And it turns out that's what happiness actually is. Not winning, not being seen by others even. Just being allowed to be the full size of who you are without apologizing for it." She smiled. "So yes, I'm happy. Probably for the first time in my adult life. And the strangest part is that I have you to thank for it in a way. Because if you'd never called me worthless, I might have spent another 20 years disappearing. You threw me away, and in doing it, you set me free. There's a mercy in that I'm still trying to understand." Michael's throat tightened. "I don't deserve for you to see it that way." "No," Claire agreed gently. "You don't. But I'm not seeing it that way for you. I'm seeing it that way for me. Grace isn't about whether the other person earned it. It's about whether you want to keep carrying the weight of the alternative. I put it down, that's all. I put it down, and I walked into my own life." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Claire told him the thing she'd been waiting to tell him the last turn in a year full of them, and it was not a turn of revenge or ruin, but something Michael had stopped daring to hope for. "I'm stepping back from the company," she said, "at the end of the quarter." Michael turned to her, startled. "What? Why, you built it back. It's yours now. Everyone loves you. Why would you leave?" "Because I never wanted to run a company, Michael," Claire said, and she laughed softly. "That was always your dream, not mine. I ran it because it needed saving, and because 400 people needed protecting, and because I owed it to myself to prove I could. And I did. It's stable now, It's healthy. The culture is strong enough to survive without me. So it's time for me to go do the thing I actually want to do." Her eyes lit up. "I'm starting a foundation, with my uncle's backing, to find the invisible people, the Emmas, the ones doing brilliant work in the dark that nobody's crediting. I'm going to spend the rest of my life dragging overlooked people into the light, funding them, championing them, making sure the next generation of quiet, brilliant women don't have to marry the wrong man and get called worthless before someone finally sees them." Michael stared at her, and then slowly he began to smile, a real smile, the first fully unguarded smile he'd managed in years. "Of course," he said. "Of course that's what you do. You spent your whole life being the invisible person who did the work. Now you're going to spend the rest of it making sure nobody else has to." He shook his head in something like awe. "You know I used to think I was the visionary. All those profiles, the genius who saw what others couldn't. And it turns out I couldn't even see the woman sleeping next to me. And you see everyone. Every overlooked person in every room. That's the actual vision, isn't it? Seeing the people nobody else bothers to." "It's the only vision that ever mattered," Claire said. And then she asked him a question that caught him completely off guard because it was generous in a way he had stopped expecting from anyone, least of all from her. "Will you help me with it?" Michael blinked. "Help you with the foundation?" "You know this company inside and out," Claire said. "You know the industry. You have connections I don't want and skills I don't have. And more than that, Michael, you know exactly what it looks like to be the person who overlooks people because you were the best at it I ever met. That makes you uniquely qualified to help me find the ones who are being overlooked. It takes a thief to catch a thief. You spent 8 years not seeing me. I think you finally learned to see. So yes, if you want it, there's a place for you in this. Not running it, never running it, but helping, making something good with the rest of your life instead of chasing an empire that was never going to make you happy anyway." Michael's eyes filled, and this time he didn't try to hide it. "After everything I did to you," he said, his voice breaking, "you're offering me a way to matter again, a way to do something that actually means something. Why? Why would you give me that?" And Claire gave him the answer that closed the circle of everything that had happened between them. The answer that revealed, finally, the full depth of the woman he had been too blind to see for 8 years. "Because I don't believe people are worthless, Michael," she said quietly. "Any people. Not even the ones who hurt me. That's the whole thing. That's the belief my entire life is built on now. You told me I was worthless and you were wrong, and I could spend the rest of my life proving you wrong by treating you the way you treated me. But that wouldn't prove you wrong. It would prove you right. It would mean I finally agreed that some people really are disposable, and I just moved you onto that list." She shook her head. "I refuse. I refuse to believe anyone is worthless, including you. You did a terrible thing, and you spent a year becoming someone who wouldn't do it again, and I'm not going to throw away the person you're becoming just because I'm entitled to. That's not who I am. That's who you used to be, and I would rather die than become you." Michael put his hand over his mouth, and for a long moment he couldn't speak at all. "I'll help you," he finally managed. "For the rest of my life, if you'll let me. It's the only thing I've ever wanted to do that actually deserves doing." "Good," Claire said simply. "Then we have work to do." And they did. In the years that followed, the foundation Claire Sterling built became one of the most quietly transformative organizations in the country. It did not put its name on skyscrapers in true Sterling fashion. It did something better. It found people, thousands of them. The overlooked analysts and the uncredited engineers and the brilliant assistants whose ideas kept getting stolen, and the quiet women in the back of every room doing the work while someone louder took the bow. It found them, and it funded them, and it dragged them into the light, and it built an entire movement around a single revolutionary idea that value does not disappear just because no one is looking at it. Emma, the young analyst, Claire had promoted on her first day, eventually rose to run the company itself, and she ran it the way she'd been taught, by seeing people. The culture Claire built outlasted Claire. That was the truest measure of it. She had not just fixed a broken company. She had planted something that kept growing after she was gone. And Michael, the self-made man who learned the hard way that no one makes anything alone, spent the rest of his days as the foundation's most tireless worker, traveling the country, walking into companies, finding the invisible people, and doing for strangers the one thing he had failed to do for the woman he loved. He never remarried. He never particularly wanted to. He had learned too late for his marriage, but not too late for his soul, that the point of a life was not to be seen, but to see, and he spent his remaining years seeing everyone he had spent his youth ignoring. He and Claire never fell back in love. That door had closed in a law office over a stack of divorce papers, and neither of them ever tried to force it open again. But they became something rarer than lovers, and more durable. They became partners in the truest sense, two people bound not by romance, but by a shared and hard-won belief that no human being is ever truly worthless. It was a better ending than the marriage would ever have been. They both knew it. Some things broken cannot be repaired into what they were, but they can be rebuilt into something else entirely, something that never could have existed without the breaking. Years later, when a young journalist asked Claire Sterling to reflect on the moment that changed her life, she assumed Claire would talk about the ballroom, about the private jet, about the day the world discovered who she really was. She didn't. "The moment that changed my life," Claire said, "was the moment a man I loved slid divorce papers across a table and told me I was worthless. Everyone thinks that was the worst day of my life. It wasn't. It was the best. Because up until that moment, I was going to spend my whole existence being small so that someone else could feel big. I was going to disappear for another 20 years. And in one cruel sentence, he set me free. He meant to end me. He accidentally began me." She smiled. "So no, I don't hate him. I feel sorry for the man he was, and I'm proud of the man he became, and I'm grateful in the strangest way for the worst thing he ever did. Because sometimes the person who throws you away is the one who finally teaches you that you were never theirs to throw." The journalist asked one final question. "If you could say one thing to everyone out there who feels invisible right now, what would it be?" And Claire Sterling, the youngest daughter of one of the most powerful families in America, the woman who had spent her whole life disappearing and then decided to stop, looked directly into the camera and delivered the words that would be quoted for a generation. "The world may not see you yet, but your worth was never up for their vote. It was decided the moment you were born, and no one, no husband, no boss, no stranger who couldn't be bothered to look, has the authority to take it away. They can ignore you. They can erase your name. They can call you worthless across a table and sign the papers and fly away. But they cannot make it true, because true value does not vanish when nobody sees it. It simply waits. And when the world finally looks, and it will look, you will still be exactly as valuable as you always were. So do not shrink. Do not disappear. Do not believe the small vision of small people. Stand exactly the full size of who you are and wait for the light. It is coming. It came for me. It will come for you." And it did. The woman Michael Bennett called worthless became the woman a generation of the overlooked would call their champion. The name he tried to erase became a name that lifted up thousands of others. And the truth he spent 8 years burying rose up exactly as Claire always knew it would not, because anyone forced it, but because that is what truth does. It waits in the dark, patient and unbroken, and then the world finally sees it. Claire Sterling was never worthless. She was never dead weight. She was never small. She was the most valuable person in every room she ever quietly stood in the back of, and in the end, every single person got to see it. She was there all along. She was always enough, and no one will ever make her disappear again.